God established the Sabbath on Saturday and never abolished that law.
The sacred basically sanctifies the secular in this sense, that we work for 6 days so that we'll have labor, the fruit of our labor, to offer on the seventh day. Justice, righteousness, scholarship, efficiency, these are things that we can and should do for 6 days. We work for 6 days. But what the seventh day requires us is to stop working. Why? So that we'll get right things right. We'll get first things first. That is, we can do things that are secular, that are temporal, that are human, social, political, and economic. But the only thing for which we were made, just like we didn't make ourselves, we can't sanctify ourselves. But once we were made as creatures, we got to observe the commandments. But the commandment that makes us holy is to not work. So it's remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy by getting all of the musicians and the choir and the vestments and the furniture in place. No, the way you fulfill the Sabbath is you don't work. Your sons and daughters, your manservants, your maidservants. Why? Because you're saved by grace, if we're talking holiness. Not apart from works, but not on account of works. And so if you're working for 6 days in the Old Testament and you're gathering the fruit of your labor to offer in the liturgy, then it's not just the seventh day that's holy, it's the seventh day that's making everything holy that you're doing. It pertains to the vertical axis that unites us in relationship to God, who alone is holy. And it really pertains to the first 3 of the 10 commandments. Have no other gods before me. Don't take my name in vain, and remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The only time Kodesh occurs in the Decalogue. And then the last 7 of the 10 commandments are the second table of the law that have to do with love of neighbor. So love of God more than self, and then love of neighbor as ourselves. It was when I was in grad school that I began to study this more closely in terms of Scripture and salvation history, because I never noticed something that turns out to have been hiding in plain view, and that is in the first book of the Bible, Genesis. It's 50 chapters long, but the word kadosh only occurs once with regard to holiness. It's in Genesis 2, after God has made all of the world in 6 days. It's the seventh day that he consecrates, he sanctifies, he calls it holy. And so the seventh day is the Sabbath, the sign of the covenant, which reveals not how much clock time it took for God to make the world, but what is his plan? What is his purpose for those who bear his image and likeness? It's not just to work for 6 days. It is to enter into his presence and rest on the seventh day. I pray for God to change my mind.
So there's a submissiveness or like a, as you say, a littleness, a moldableness.
6 days you shall work on the seventh unit. And so if we worship,
keeping it holy with rest and worship. And yet Christians, for some reason, ignore the law and worship on Sundays. What gives? Some have suggested that it's simply switched days, that we no longer observe it on Saturday, but it's still the same Sabbath, just celebrated on Sunday. While seemingly logical, this is not correct. In the beginning, God worked for 6 days, creating the heavens and the earth, the seas and all that are in them, and on the seventh day, he rested. And since God did this, you should do this as well.